All right, today, talking about Paulus Hector Mair and his Krumphau. Paulus Hector Mair is one of the richest and arguably toughest sources in Lichtenauer's German Kunstgeschichten's tradition to crack, from my opinion. And so today, the question is, the fundamentals that we've been looking at in previous videos, do they hold up? Do they hold up, and do they actually help us understand, finally, what Paulus Hector Mair might be talking about? Let's find out.
Paulus Hector Mair's Longsword 2, the crooked cut from both sides. Item: when you come to the opponent in the onset, set your left foot forward and hold your sword with the point to your right side, standing in place in the crooked cut. If he cuts in above to your opening, then step up with your right foot and go to him in the crooked on his right side, and cut to his nearest opening. If he goes into you crooked this way, and you have your right foot forward also in the crooked cut, then step in with your left leg and parry his cut with your long edge. Instantly follow up with your right foot and fall crooked on his sword in your short edge and slice through his head.
So now that we have gone through the actual interpretation, taking the elements of this, there's actually a flow drill that's built right in. So we're gonna kind of step through this, and it's a great way to actually be training Krumps dealing with Zorns kind of from both sides. So here we go. So I'm gonna do, so I'm gonna do a right Zorn.
Right Krump, left Zorn.
And then left Krump, then right Zorn.
Right Krump, left Zorn.
Left Krump. Right Zorn.
Right Krump.
Left Krump. Oh, yep.
Left Zorn.
Yeah. And then, so if we just keep going, boom, 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 boom. Looks like that. So we're going to talk about the footage that hopefully you just saw with Paulus Hector Mair's take on Krumphau. It's his second technique out of like 100+ techniques for Longsword. And so I think that the thing that I think he's really trying to focus on is, what is a reasonable response to Krump, right? So is there a way to respond to Krump that gives you an advantage and is sort of atypical for what a response to Krump might be? So typically, if someone is going to try to Krump, right, so they're going to Krump and they're going to push you down, right? So for me, the pattern is this sort of like running off pattern that happens naturally when I get pushed down by a Krump, right? So one way to sort of get ahead of this is, instead of just letting me be folded down, is in that moment to actually flip the other way, right? So in terms of patterns, cutting patterns, instead of doing this running off pattern, from here I can actively go to here, to the other side. So it's this pattern, the cutting through pattern that we've talked about as part of our fundamentals, as opposed to the running off pattern, right? Okay? So that's a really key component that is still very much in line with just basic cutting patterns, and that Paulus Hector Mair seems to be taking advantage of, right? Taking advantage of the idea that, like, hey, I don't have to be folded in a direction that I don't want. I can go and basically, instead of being on my right side, actually go to the other side, the left side, and be able to open up those targets to attack. So what's great about this is, again, to sort of like figure out this interpretation, we're doing it in a way which is consistent with the fundamentals that we've been focused on, which is namely, try to do Krumps with one step at a time, not two steps, right? So one step, one cut, one step, one crump. Crump being a non-static defense, basically a cutting defense where you're getting on top and pushing it down. And in response, instead of letting yourself run off, actually cut through and go to the other side. So I think those are the real key points that come out of what Paulus Hector Mair is trying to present. And then the other cool thing, again, hopefully that you saw in the footage, was the flow drill that comes out of it. The title is Krumphau from both sides. And so what's happening is there is a crump on the right from one person and a crump from the left from the other person. And there's a great flow drill, which again, hopefully you've seen. So now that we've actually gone through the actual text in Paulus Hector Mair, what are the things that we learned from there, right? So number one, as a general important implication, the Germans are often, across all the sources, often very unclear when they say like versetzen or parry or whatever, right? They don't say exactly what those things are, right? So I think for interpretation purposes, a lot of the time people assume sort of like a plow or an ox kind of static defense. And so the thing that I think is really important is, hey, maybe we need to be thinking about dynamic cutting defenses, literally using cuts or the mechanics of cutting in order to do defenses. And if you're going to do that, crump is fantastic, right? Crump is a way to basically get on top of the opponent's sword and suppress it, all while you're basically you're just continuing to cut dynamically. So if you think about it, think about how differently you end up position-wise if you're using that for a default parry or as one of your primary defenses. And think about what the impact then has on interpretations in general, right? So I think that's something all of us should think about if we're looking at the German sources. Think about, hey, what happens if I actually crump as a sort of standard default defense? The other thing about sort of the sources and in general is filling in gaps, right? So one of the things about this Paulus Hector Mair example is that he doesn't, like, if we're on the mark here, like we're actually filling in gaps of things that he does not explicitly say. And again, just like a lot of the sources out there, and like for communicating instructional information in general, like it is not possible for an instructor to say every last nuance, right? There are always going to be gaps. And so, for instance, if you're a purist about this stuff, then you will always be limited only by what someone has either written down or illustrated, right? And so from my perspective and from my club's perspective, we are not purists. We are expecting that there are gaps. We're expecting that we're going to have to address the so-called frog DNA issue that like has sort of haunted HEMA from the very beginning, this idea that, hey, maybe we need to draw from other sources in order to fill in those gaps. And my approach on that, our club's approach has been, no, we're not going to fill it in from other traditions. We're going to fill it in from basic fundamentals, right? We define how to step. We define all the ways that we cut, thrust, et cetera, et cetera. And from there, we come up with our own very consistent way of moving and attacking and defending, and then fill in gaps based on like the default ways that we would naturally attack or defend, right? And the closer we get to like matching all the interpretations that way, the more that we have a sense whether our fundamentals are right. So what are the fundamentals that seem to be mattering here? Again, making sure that every time that we take a crump or a cut in general, it's one step, one crump, one step, one cut. Another is, again, trying to make sure that we stay in motion, right? So there's a very sort of dance-like stay moving kind of dynamic. You don't have to. There are going to be times when you stop, but we've been finding that that's more of the exception than the rule. And yeah, so those are all things, if you look back to the previous crump material, this is very much in line with all of those fundamentals and very consistent. The one thing finally that I would kind of call out is that, again, we don't know everything. So this interpretation, I think, I would say confidence level, I feel like we're at least an 8 out of 10, maybe 9 out of 10, maybe a 9.5. The one thing that kind of seems a little bit odd to me is that Joe here is going to read the section again. Brandon, let's just kind of quickly run through the whole thing. So if you just walk through it. So from here, boom, I go here, and when he crumps and I go here, so Joe, go ahead and read the section. Yep.
If he goes into you crooked this way, and you have your right foot forward also in the crooked cut,
Right.
then step in with your left leg and parry his cut with your long edge.
Cool. Stepped to the left, getting away from the attack, parry with my long edge. I can do it short edge, both are fine. I'm about to do this guy, right? But you would expect me to do the crump off my left foot, and instead, Paulus Hector Mair says what?
Instantly follow up with your right foot and fall crooked on his sword with your short edge and slice through his head.
Right, so it's a little weird that he's having me step with my right foot potentially to do the crump, but he uses the word instantly. So, sort of in real time as I do this, it's kind of going to look like this. I'm going to go boom, boom as I go to the slice. So it feels a little bit like really the slice is where you're doing the right foot stepping. But again, the fact that these things kind of flow together makes me, and the fact that he uses the word instantly makes me feel like that could be okay. But it is, again, if you're being an honest interpreter, like those are the sort of anomalies that you got to pay attention to and really think about. Final thoughts, like hopefully this gives people confidence that kind of doing crump in this kind of very flowy movement-based method has merit, especially if it helps us understand Paulus Hector Mair. A follow-up question would be, hey, does this help with other Paulus Hector Mair techniques like his Zwerchhau or his Schielhau? Again, like the next technique is like Longsword number 3, Zwerch from both sides, number 4, Schielhau from both sides. So yeah, maybe we'll take a look at that and see if that holds up. There's also clarification on the slice, right? So that very last slice piece, when he cuts over here, right? Crump, right? So from here, this idea of slicing to the head, come back up, right? As opposed to this kind of a slice, yeah, there's something to be spoken of in terms of like the sort of slicing as a push cut that I think we'll be exploring in future videos as well. So I think that's it for today, and we'll see you in the next video.